They said she married for love. The truth? Her father sold her name for a saddle. What comes next will break you. The courthouse clock chimed 7 when Mercy Caldwell stepped onto the depot platform, her father's hat box clutched tight against her ribs. Frost glazed the boards under her boots, and her breath rose like little ghosts. $17 in her pocket, just enough for passage west, and one hot meal. The hat box held the rest of her life. Her mother's ring, 2 letters of character, and the marriage certificate signed yesterday. Thomas Garrett met her when the stage rattled in, tall and steady, grey eyes direct. He didn't press when she kept her distance, only said, "Supplies are loaded. A room's ready, when you're comfortable." His courtesy felt like a promise, more binding than the ink on the paper. By the time the stage reached Brennan Creek, she'd seen enough to know his steadiness wasn't for show. Townsfolk greeted him with quiet respect, and at the ranch a woman named Elena welcomed her with coffee and warm biscuits. The house was clean, flowers waiting on the table, a small room prepared for her alone. Mercy set the hat box on the bed, still guarding the last pieces of her old life, and told herself she was ready to learn the new one. The house's interior surprised her with its orderliness, clean floors, sturdy furniture, and windows that let in generous light. Thomas had clearly prepared for her arrival. Fresh flowers on the kitchen table, extra blankets folded at the foot of a narrow bed in what was obviously meant to be her private room. "The cattle keep me busy most days," Thomas explained, setting her carpet bag beside the bedroom door. "But I'm usually back by supper. Elena comes 3 days a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays." Mercy nodded, calculating the rhythm of her new life. "What would you like me to do?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "Do? I'm not here as decoration," she said, more sharply than intended. "I can work." Thomas glanced at Elena, who was bustling around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. "Well, there's the garden come spring. And the books could use attention. I'm better with cattle than numbers. I kept the accounts at Morrison's Mercantile for 2 years, Mercy said. "I know figures. That'd be helpful." He retrieved his hat from the table. "I should check on the stock. Elena will show you around, help you get settled." After he left, Elena poured coffee and sat across from Mercy at the kitchen table. "He's nervous," she said, matter-of-factly. "About what?" "Having a wife. Never been married before, and he's set in his ways." Elena stirred honey into her coffee. "But he's a good man. Pays fair wages, doesn't drink to excess, treats his animals well. You could do worse." Mercy opened the hat box and withdrew the marriage certificate, spreading it flat on the table. The ink was still dark, the signatures still sharp. "It's all legal?" "Course it is." Pastor Mills performed the ceremony proper, filed the papers at the courthouse. Elena studied Mercy's face. "You having doubts?" "I'm having thoughts," Mercy admitted. "Yesterday I was Mercy Caldwell, owing money I couldn't pay, with nowhere to go. Today I'm Mrs. Thomas Garrett, sitting in a house with good windows and coffee that doesn't taste like mud. It's a considerable change." "Change can be good," Elena said, especially when the alternative was worse. Through the window, Mercy could see Thomas checking fence posts in a nearby pasture. He moved with the steady gait of a man who knew his business, stopping to examine each post, testing the wire tension. "What does he expect of me?" Mercy asked. Elena refilled their cups. "Companionship, I'd guess. House feels different with just one person rattling around in it. And maybe," she paused diplomatically, "maybe a family, eventually. But he's not the pushing kind." Mercy touched her mother's ring through the fabric of her coat pocket. A family required more than legal documents and good intentions. It required trust, affection, the kind of closeness that couldn't be purchased for $17. "Show me the books," she said. Elena led her to a small room off the main parlor that served as Thomas's office. Ledgers lined one shelf, and a desk held neat stacks of receipts and correspondence. Mercy opened the most recent ledger and found columns of income and expenses written in Thomas's careful hand. The numbers told a story of modest prosperity: cattle sales to the railroad, hay sold to neighboring ranches, breeding fees for his prize bull. His expenses were equally methodical: feed, veterinary costs, equipment repairs, wages for seasonal help. "He's careful with money," Mercy observed. Has to be. Ranching's feast or famine, and he survived 2 hard winters and a drought. Mercy ran her finger down a column of figures, noting a discrepancy. This entry, $37 for supplies but no itemization. Elena leaned over her shoulder. That'd be from last month. He bought things for your arrival. New linens, extra food stores, that mirror in your room. The thoughtfulness of it struck her unexpectedly. While she'd been signing marriage papers out of necessity, he'd been preparing a place for her with genuine care. At noon, Thomas returned for dinner. Elena had prepared roast chicken and root vegetables, and they ate with the kind of polite conversation typical of new acquaintances. He asked about her journey, her impressions of the ranch. She inquired about his cattle, the local weather patterns. I looked at your ledgers, Mercy said as Elena cleared the plates. The bookkeeping is precise, but you might benefit from more detailed categorization. Thomas leaned back in his chair. How so? Separate accounts for different types of expenses. Feed costs, equipment, labor. It would help you see patterns. Identify areas where you might save money or need to invest more. That sounds useful, he said. Would you be willing to take that on? Yes. The prospect of meaningful work, of contributing something valuable, eased another knot of uncertainty in her chest. After dinner, Thomas returned to his cattle, and Elena departed for her own home. Mercy found herself alone in the house for the first time, free to explore without feeling watched. The parlor held a small library, practical volumes on cattle ranching and veterinary medicine, plus a few novels and a volume of poetry. Thomas's bedroom door stood open, revealing a simple space with military neat organization. Her own room adjoined the parlor, with its narrow bed and the mirror Elena had mentioned. Mercy unpacked her few belongings, placing her mother's ring in a small dish on the dresser and arranging her letters of character beside the mirror. The hatbox she set on the floor beside the bed, within easy reach. As afternoon shadows lengthened, she began reorganizing Thomas's office, creating new categories in his ledger system and sorting receipts by type. The work felt familiar, comforting in its logic and order. Thomas found her there when he returned at sunset, bent over the desk with ink-stained fingers and receipt stubs organized in precise piles. Making progress? He asked from the doorway. I've identified several areas where you can track costs more efficiently, Mercy said, looking up. And you're spending more on hay than you need to. Johnson's ranch is selling at 12 cents per bale. You've been paying 15 at the co-op. Thomas stepped into the room, studying her work. How did you learn Johnson's prices? I asked Elena. She knows all the local suppliers. A slow smile crossed his face. That's smart thinking. It's practical thinking, Mercy corrected. Every nickel we trap is a calf we don't have to sell early. Same thing, in the end. He lingered in the doorway, hat in his hands. Elena left supper, warming on the stove. You? Hungry? They ate together as the last light faded outside the kitchen windows. The conversation came easier this time. Discussion of ranch business, local suppliers, the upcoming cattle drive to the railroad depot. Mercy found herself contributing ideas, suggestions for improving efficiency and reducing costs. You have a head for this, Thomas observed, serving her more stew. I like problems that have solutions, she replied. After supper, they sat in the parlor while Thomas reviewed the day's work notes. Mercy mended a torn seam in her traveling dress, the kind of domestic task that felt normal despite the strangeness of their circumstances. Tomorrow I'll ride out to check the north pasture, Thomas said. Could be gone most of the day. You'll be all right here? I have plenty to do with the books, Mercy said. And I'd like to explore the property, get familiar with the layout. Stay close to the house for now, he cautioned. Country's mostly safe, but there's always the chance of trouble. The protective concern in his voice reminded her that she was no longer entirely responsible for her own safety. It was another adjustment, having someone who cared whether she came to harm. At 9 o'clock, Thomas banked the fire and wished her good night. Mercy retired to her room, changing into her nightgown and brushing her hair in front of the new mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, married, settled, no longer calculating which possessions she could sell to pay debts. She opened the hatbox and withdrew her mother's ring, slipping it onto her finger for the first time since her father's funeral. The gold felt warm against her skin, a connection to better times and the hope that they might come again. Through her bedroom window, she could see light still burning in the barn. Thomas, probably checking on the animals one last time before bed. The sight of that distant light, the knowledge that someone else was keeping watch, made the darkness feel less empty. Mercy blew out her lamp and settled into bed, listening to the night sounds of her new home. Cattle lowing in distant pastures, wind moving through the eaves, the settling of old wood. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without wondering what crisis tomorrow might bring. 3 weeks into their marriage, Mercy discovered Thomas in the kitchen before dawn, standing over a pot of coffee with his shoulders rigid as fence wire. "What's wrong?" she asked, tying her robe. He turned, and she saw strain etched around his eyes. "Johnson sent word. His cattle are showing signs of blackleg. If it spreads," Mercy knew enough ranch business by now to understand the implications. Blackleg could devastate a herd, and Johnson's spread bordered Thomas's north pasture. A disease outbreak could mean financial ruin. "What do we do?" she asked. The question surprised him. She'd said "we" without thinking, claiming partnership in his troubles. But as Thomas began explaining the need to isolate their herd, vaccinate what cattle they could afford to treat, and prepare for potential losses, Mercy found herself thinking not as a temporary resident, but as someone whose future depended on the ranch's survival. "I'll need to ride out at first light," Thomas said, pouring coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "Check every animal. Look for any signs of infection. How can I help?" Thomas paused, cup halfway to his lips. "It's dangerous work. Sick cattle can be unpredictable. I didn't ask if it was dangerous. I asked how I could help." Something shifted in his expression, recognition, perhaps, or respect. "Can you handle a horse?" "I can learn." By sunrise, Thomas had saddled a gentle mare named Belle and was teaching Mercy the basics of mounted cattle inspection. She proved a quick student, though her muscles protested the unaccustomed activity. They rode to the north pasture together, where 43 head of cattle grazed in morning mist. Thomas showed her what to look for: limping that might indicate leg swelling, animals standing apart from the herd, signs of labored breathing. At midday, they stopped to rest in the shade of a cottonwood tree, sharing water and the cold biscuits Elena had packed. Thomas leaned against the tree trunk, hat pushed back, studying Mercy with something approaching wonder. "What?" she asked. "Most women wouldn't choose to spend their honeymoon doctoring cattle," he said. "Most women didn't marry strangers for practical reasons," Mercy replied. Then, more softly, "But we're not strangers anymore, are we?" Thomas considered this. I don't suppose we are." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small wooden box. "I meant to give this to you on our wedding day, but things moved so fast." Inside the box was a silver ring, simple but well made, sized to fit her finger. Not expensive, but chosen with care. "It's not much," Thomas said. "But I thought, if you're going to be Mrs. Garrett, you should have a ring that says so." Mercy slipped off her mother's gold band and placed it carefully in her coat pocket, then allowed Thomas to slide the silver ring onto her finger. The metal was warm from his hands, and the fit was perfect. "How did you know my size?" "Elena helped," he admitted. "She's good at noticing details." Mercy studied the ring, turning her hand to catch the light. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was a declaration of commitment, his willingness to claim her publicly as his wife, to give her a place and a name that couldn't be taken away. "Thank you," she said. They returned to work, checking the rest of the herd and treating 3 more animals that showed early symptoms. By evening, they'd identified 7 potentially infected cattle and established a quarantine protocol that might prevent the disease from spreading. "I can see that," Elena said, and there was approval in her voice. Over the following days, as they monitored the quarantined cattle and watched for new infections, Mercy began to understand what Thomas had meant about looking after things. It wasn't just the animals, it was the whole operation, the careful balance of resources and risks that kept a ranch viable. She also began to understand something about herself. At supper, they discussed strategies for protecting their remaining stock, sharing ideas and building plans like true partners. When Elena arrived the next day, she found them bent over the kitchen table with veterinary manuals and supply catalogs, working out costs for vaccines and treatments. "You two look like you've been through a war," Elena observed, noting their wind-burned faces and dusty clothes. "Fighting blackleg," Thomas explained. Mercy's been a tremendous help after the blackleg scare, after everything. This marriage, the ranch, what we're building here. He turned to face her. I want you to know, whatever happens, you have a place here. Not because of any legal papers, but because you've earned it. Mercy touched the silver ring on her finger. What if I want more than just a place? What do you mean? She chose her words carefully. What if I want a real marriage? Not just partnership in ranch business, but everything a marriage can be? Thomas was quiet for a long moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. Are you sure? Because once we cross that line, there's no going back to separate rooms and polite conversation. I'm sure, Mercy said, and realized she meant it completely. That night, for the first time, Thomas knocked softly on her bedroom door. When she opened it, he stood in the hallway with uncertain eyes and gentle hands, waiting for her permission to enter the life they could build together. The blackleg outbreak passed without devastating their herd, but it left Thomas and Mercy with a clearer understanding of how quickly prosperity could turn to ruin. They'd lost 5 head of cattle manageable, but enough to tighten their margins for the coming year. We need to diversify, Mercy said one morning in early December, reviewing their revised financial projections. Cattle alone leaves us too vulnerable to disease, weather, market fluctuations. Thomas looked up from his coffee. What do you suggest? Horses. The military contracts for cavalry mounts are steady money, and we have good grazing. Plus, I've been thinking about that section of bottomland near the creek, its rich soil going to waste. You want to farm? Hay and grain. We're already buying what we could grow ourselves, and there's market demand from smaller ranches that don't have suitable acreage. Thomas studied the ledger pages she'd filled with calculations and projections. This would mean significant investment. Seed money, equipment, breeding stock for horses. The bank in Brennan Creek might extend credit based on our cattle assets, Mercy said. I'd like to talk to them. 2 breeding mares, proven stock from the Robertson place that's going up for auction. The military contracts provide steady demand, and we've researched bloodlines that produce the kind of horses they want. Watkins turned to Thomas. This is your wife's idea? It's our idea, Thomas said firmly. I trust her judgment. The banker made notes on their application. I can approve a $1,000 loan secured against your cattle and ranch property. Interest at 8% annually, payable over 5 years. They shook hands on the deal, and Mercy felt the weight of new responsibility settle on her shoulders. They were betting their future on her analysis, her projections, her belief that they could make the ranch more than just sustainable. On the ride home, Thomas was quieter than usual. Finally, Mercy asked what he was thinking. A year ago, I was a bachelor cattleman with modest goals and simple problems, he said. Now I'm married to a woman who wants to revolutionize the operation and taking on debt that could cost us everything. Having second thoughts? Thomas glanced at her, and his expression softened. Number. Surprised thoughts. Maybe. I expected a quiet partner who'd keep house and help with the books. Instead, I got someone with bigger ambitions than my own. Is that a problem? It's an opportunity, he said. If we can pull it off. They spent the winter planning their expansion, studying horse bloodlines and crop rotation schedules. Mercy corresponded with agricultural extension agents and horse breeders, gathering information and building networks of suppliers and buyers. In January, they attended the Robertson estate auction, competing with other ranchers for the breeding stock Mercy had identified. The bidding was aggressive, but they came away with 2 mares and a young stallion, the foundation of their horse breeding program. $3,000, Thomas muttered, as they loaded their new animals for transport home. For 3 horses. For 3 investment opportunities, Mercy corrected. Bell Star has already produced 2 foals that sold for cavalry contracts. Juniper's bloodline traces back to horses that served in the cavalry during the Indian campaigns. And Thunder, she gestured toward the black stallion. He's going to sire horses that will make our reputation. Back at the ranch, they converted an unused barn section into proper breeding facilities and began the careful work of developing their horse program. It was labor-intensive and technically demanding, requiring knowledge of genetics, nutrition, and animal behavior that neither of them fully possessed. We need help, Thomas admitted after a particularly difficult foaling that nearly cost them both mare and foal. I know someone, Elena said when they discussed the problem over dinner. My nephew Roberto worked for the cavalry horse program at Fort Collins before he came west. He knows bloodlines, training, everything you need to know. Roberto Sanchez arrived in February, a quiet man with skilled hands and an intuitive understanding of horses. Under his guidance, their breeding program began to show promise, but the additional salary strained their budget further. We're spending money faster than we're making it, Mercy observed, reviewing their March accounts. The loan payments, Roberto's wages, feed costs for the additional animals we need income now, not 2 years from now when the foals are ready to sell. The cattle sales won't come until spring, Thomas said, and those won't be enough to cover our new expenses. Mercy studied their situation, looking for opportunities they'd missed. What about the hay operation? We've got that bottom land prepared, and there's early demand from ranches that lost winter feed to the hard freeze. Plant hay in March? Plant oats. Fast-growing, good cattle feed, and we can get 2 crops before winter if we manage it right. It was a gamble. Early planting risked late frost damage, and oats required different handling than hay. But with Roberto's help, they prepared the fields and seeded 40 acres of bottomland with the hardiest oat varieties they could find. The work was exhausting. Thomas and Roberto handled the heavy field preparation, while Mercy managed logistics, seed procurement, equipment rental, coordination with potential buyers. Elena pitched in when she could, bringing meals to the fields and helping with the horses when the men were busy with crops. In April, their efforts began paying off. The oat crop emerged strong and green, and their first horsefoal, Bell Star's colt, showed the quality bloodlines that would command premium prices. Military contractors began expressing interest in their breeding program, and local ranchers placed advance orders for oat hay. But success brought new challenges. Mercy found herself managing a complex operation that required constant attention to markets, weather, animal health, and financial planning. The responsibility was exhilarating but overwhelming. Sometimes I wonder if we took on too much, she confided to Thomas one evening as they reviewed crop reports and breeding schedules. Having doubts? Having fears, she admitted. What if we can't make the loan payments? What if the crops fail or the horses don't sell? What if I've led us into something we can't handle? Thomas set down his papers and moved to her chair, placing his hands on her shoulders. Remember what you told me about problems having solutions? This feels like too many problems with too few solutions. Then we solve them one at a time, he said. Together. The word together had taken on deeper meaning over the months of their marriage. They'd moved beyond the careful politeness of strangers to genuine partnership, in bed and out of it, in planning and in crisis management. Mercy had found something she'd never expected, a relationship based on mutual respect, shared goals, and growing affection that felt more solid than romantic fantasy. In May, disaster struck. A late spring storm brought hail that devastated half their oat crop just weeks before harvest. Standing in the battered field, watching months of work reduced to broken stems and scattered grain, Mercy felt the weight of failure crushing her chest. How much can we salvage? She asked Roberto. He walked through the damaged areas, assessing. Maybe 40% of what we planted. The rest is total loss. Thomas surveyed the destruction with the stoic expression of a man accustomed to setbacks. Insurance? Covers basic seed costs, nothing more, Mercy said. We'll lose most of our investment, and we still have loan payments due. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table with their ledgers spread before them, calculating the impact of the crop loss. No matter how Mercy arranged the numbers, they came up short, not enough income to cover expenses and debt service. We could sell some cattle, Thomas suggested. Not at spring prices. We'd take a loss that would make our situation worse. The horses? Too early. The foals aren't old enough, and selling the breeding stock would eliminate our long-term strategy. They worked until midnight, exploring options and contingencies, but the mathematics remained stubborn. They needed either more income or more time, preferably both. There is one possibility, Mercy said finally. My father's property in Millerville. It's been tied up in probate, but the court case should settle soon. If I can sell it. How much? Maybe 2,000, if I'm lucky. Enough to buy us time and cover the immediate shortfall. Thomas reached across the table and took her hand. That money should be yours, not tied up in ranch debt. The ranch is mine now, Mercy said. Our debts are my debts. Our success is my success. We're in this together, remember? The next morning, Mercy wrote letters to the probate attorney and began preparations for a trip to Millerville. It would mean leaving Thomas to manage the ranch alone during their busiest season, but they had few alternatives. As she packed her traveling bag, Mercy reflected on how much had changed since she'd first made this journey as a desperate woman with no options. Now she was returning as a married woman with stakes in a growing operation, fighting to preserve something she'd helped build rather than running from something she'd lost. The hatbox sat on her dresser, mostly empty now, her mother's ring relocated to her jewelry drawer, the marriage certificate filed with their other important papers. But she tucked the letters of character back inside, along with recent correspondence about their horse breeding program, evidence of who she'd been and who she was becoming. Thomas drove her to the depot, and they stood on the platform waiting for the eastbound stage, both aware that this separation represented a crucial test of what they'd built together. Don't take any unnecessary risks, Thomas said. If the property sale falls through, we'll find another way. There has to be another way, Mercy agreed. Because I'm not losing this. Not the ranch. Not what we've built. Not us. The stage arrived, and Thomas helped her aboard, his kiss goodbye carrying months of shared effort and mutual investment in their future. As Millerville came into view through the stage window, Mercy prepared herself for the hardest negotiation of her life, not just for the money they needed, but for the time and space to make their ambitious dreams sustainable. The courthouse in Millerville looked smaller than Mercy remembered, its brick facade weathered by another hard winter. She climbed the steps with the hatbox under her arm, carrying documents that would either save their ranch or force them into bankruptcy. Inside, probate Judge Morrison reviewed her father's case with the weary efficiency of a man who'd overseen too many family tragedies. Property's been appraised at $1,800, he announced. But there are outstanding liens, medical bills, merchant debts, back taxes. After settlements, you're looking at maybe $1,200 in net proceeds. $1,200. Not enough to cover their shortfall and keep the ranch viable through the summer. Mercy felt her carefully constructed plans crumbling. However, Judge Morrison continued. There's been an inquiry about the property. Railroads looking to extend their spur line through that section. They've made an informal offer of $2,500, contingent on clear title. Mercy's pulse quickened. $2,500 would cover their immediate debts and provide operating capital through harvest season. What do I need to do? Sign the settlement papers, clear the liens, then negotiate directly with the railroad representative. He's staying at the hotel through Friday. The church bell across the square chimed 11 as Mercy emerged from the courthouse. She had until Friday, 3 days to complete the sale and return to the ranch before their loan payment came due. Time enough, if everything went smoothly. At the hotel, she found the railroad representative, a sharp-eyed man named Hutchins, who evaluated her with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to driving hard bargains. Mrs. Garrett, he said, consulting his notes. I understand you're the daughter of deceased William Caldwell, sole heir to the property in question. That's correct. Mercy set the hatbox on the table between them, a gesture of businesslike determination. Our surveyors indicate the property would serve our purposes, but frankly, we have other options. I'm authorized to offer $2,200. Final offer. $2,200 was less than she'd hoped, but still enough to stabilize their finances. Mercy calculated quickly after clearing liens and legal fees. She'd net perhaps $1,800. Adequate, but barely. $2,500, she counted. The property includes water rights and the best access route through the valley. Your alternatives will cost more in engineering and construction. Hutchins smiled thinly. You're well informed for a rancher's wife. I'm well informed because I'm a rancher's wife, Mercy replied. I understand land values and development costs. $2,500 is fair compensation for what you're acquiring. They negotiated for an hour, trading incremental concessions until they settled on $2,400, enough to clear the debts, cover the ranch's immediate needs, and provide a small cushion for unexpected expenses. I'll have the papers drawn up, Hutchins said. We can close tomorrow afternoon. That evening, Mercy wrote to Thomas, explaining the sale terms and expected timeline. The letter would reach him the same day she returned, but she wanted him to know their gamble had succeeded. She also walked through Millerville streets one final time, visiting the places that had shaped her early life. The mercantile where she'd worked, the boarding house where she'd spent her last unmarried night, the depot where she'd waited for a stage that would carry her to an uncertain future. Now that future felt solid, grounded in shared work and mutual respect. Thomas would be checking the oat harvest, Roberto would be training their youngest foals, Elena would be managing the household with her characteristic efficiency. Mercy was no longer fleeing from failure, she was returning to success she'd helped create. The property closing proceeded smoothly. By Thursday afternoon, Mercy held a bank draft for $1,827, enough money to secure their ranch operation and fund the next phase of their expansion plans. The westbound stage left Friday morning. As Millerville disappeared behind her, Mercy opened the hat box and withdrew her mother's wedding ring, slipping it onto her right hand alongside the silver band Thomas had given her. Past and present, connected by commitment and hope. The stage reached Brennan Creek at midday, where she found Thomas waiting with the wagon, his face tense with worry, until he saw her step down safely. "How did it go?" he asked, helping her aboard. Mercy handed him the bank draft. "Better than expected." The railroad wanted the property for a spur line extension. Thomas examined the draft, and she watched relief wash over his features. "This will cover everything: the loan payment, operating expenses, even some reserve for emergencies." "It will do more than that," Mercy said. "It will give us time to prove our horse breeding program and establish the hay operation. We're not just surviving anymore, Thomas. We're building something permanent." On the ride home, she told him about the negotiations, the settlement process, her final walk through Millerville. Thomas listened with the careful attention she'd learned to value, asking questions that showed he understood both the practical and emotional significance of what she'd accomplished. "You could have kept that money," he said as they approached the ranch. "Started over somewhere else, independent." "Independent of what?" "This is my home now. These are my debts, my investments, my future." She gestured toward the fields where their oat crop was nearing harvest readiness. "I chose this life, Thomas. All of it." The ranch looked prosperous in the afternoon. Light cattle grazing on green pastures, horses moving with trained precision in the practice corral, buildings maintained and purposeful. Roberto emerged from the barn to wave them in, and Elena appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron in the familiar gesture of someone interrupting work to welcome family home. That evening, they sat on the porch, reviewing the updated financial projections that Mercy's property sale had made possible. The numbers told a story of stability, achieved through partnership, risk-taking tempered by careful planning, success built on mutual trust and shared effort. "What's next?" Thomas asked, setting aside the ledgers. "Next, we harvest the oats, train the foals, and plan for next year's expansion." Mercy leaned against his shoulder, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Next, we keep building what we started." The church bell in Brennan Creek chimed 9 times, carried on the evening wind. Time for another day to end, another night to begin, another chapter in the ongoing story of their carefully constructed life. Thomas's arm tightened around her shoulders. "No regrets?" Mercy thought about the $17 that had brought her here, the marriage certificate that had changed her name, the months of work that had transformed her from desperate refugee to genuine partner in a thriving operation. "No regrets," she said. "Only gratitude." Above them, the first stars appeared over the mountains, points of light in the vast western sky that no longer seemed empty but full of possibility. 1 year later, Mercy stood in the same depot where she'd first arrived as Thomas's mail-order bride, but now she carried a leather satchel instead of a battered hat box, and her destination was the bank rather than an uncertain future. The horse breeding program had exceeded all projections. 3 cavalry contracts, 2 breeding agreements with neighboring ranches, and a waiting list for their next year's foals. The diversified farming operation had proven equally successful, their hay commanded premium prices, and the oat crops had established them as reliable suppliers to the regional market. Mrs. Garrett, Harold Watkins greeted her with the respectful enthusiasm reserved for valued customers. I trust this visit brings good news? The best kind. Mercy replied, placing a check on his desk. Final payment on our loan. 18 months early. Watkins examined the check with satisfaction. Remarkable achievement. When you first came to me with that expansion plan, I had my doubts. But you took the risk, Mercy observed. That made all the difference. Walking back to the depot, she reflected on the transformation a single year had brought. The desperate woman who'd sold herself for the price of a saddle had become a respected businesswoman whose opinions carried weight in agricultural circles. The marriage of convenience had evolved into genuine partnership based on mutual respect, shared goals, and deepening affection. The westbound stage carried her home through familiar countryside. She'd made this journey dozens of times now, but today felt different. Not the completion of business, but the celebration of permanence achieved. Thomas met her at the ranch gate, mounted on Thunder, their prize stallion now fully trained and commanding stud fees that justified every dollar of their initial investment. How did it go? He asked, riding alongside the wagon. Paid in full, Mercy announced. We're debt-free with money in the bank and contracts for next year already signed. That evening, they walked through their property as the sun set over the mountains. The original cattle operation remained the foundation of their success, but it was now part of a diversified enterprise that included horse breeding, crop farming, and a growing reputation for agricultural innovation. Remember when you said I had a head for this business? Mercy asked as they checked the horses in the evening pasture. I remember thinking you were trouble, Thomas replied with a smile. The kind of woman who'd change a man's quiet life beyond recognition. Was I wrong to do that? Thomas considered the question seriously. You gave me something I didn't know. I wanted a true partner, someone who shared the work and the risks and the rewards. I thought I was buying companionship for the price of a saddle. Instead, I got a business partner, a lover, and a friend. They paused at the fence where Belle Star grazed with her yearling colt, both animals representing the successful breeding program that had secured their future. In the distance, Roberto was securing the barn for the night, and Elena's lamp glowed in the kitchen window where she was preparing tomorrow's bread. What comes next? Mercy asked. Whatever we decide, Thomas said. Together. The hat box sat in their bedroom closet now, repurposed to hold important documents, deeds, contracts, certificates that recorded their achievements. But Mercy sometimes opened it just to touch the marriage certificate that had started everything, remembering the desperate courage that had brought her here and the patient work that had transformed necessity into choice. They'd sold her for a saddle, but she'd paid with determination and built something that couldn't be bought or sold, a life earned through partnership, sustained by trust, and enriched by the daily choice to keep building something worth keeping. If something in this story touched you, linger with us. We'll handle the rest.